The benchmark number moves quickly. It lands in headlines, in investor notes, in policy briefings, before anyone has read past the abstract. One technical report, opened at the summary, and then opened again 17 pages in, at the method's acknowledgement, contains two different accounts of where a capability actually came from. The gap between those two accounts is the document's real finding, and it is written in plain language that the press release did not quote. The DeepSeek-R1 technical report, published by DeepSeek AI in January 2025 and available through the preprint server at the identifier 2501.12948, is the document. We will read it twice, once for what the abstract establishes, and once for what the methods section names that the abstract does not. The abstract opens on a capability claim. The model achieves performance comparable to OpenAI's O1 across reasoning benchmarks covering mathematics, code generation, and language tasks. The authors frame this not as a claim about scale, but as a claim about method. The training pipeline uses a technique the paper calls group relative policy optimization, applied through reinforcement learning without supervised fine-tuning in the first stage. The finding the authors emphasize is that chain-of-thought reasoning behavior emerged from the reinforcement learning process itself. The paper presents that emergence as the contribution. The benchmark scores the report cites are specific. On the AIME 2024 mathematics competition problems, on the Math 500 evaluation set, and on Codeforce's competitive programming tasks, the report places DeepSeek R1 at or near the scores OpenAI has reported for O1. The paper states that these evaluations were conducted by the authors. It does not claim the scores were independently verified by a third party. The record shows the results as reported. It does not show external confirmation. The efficiency language in the abstract is where the framing becomes careful. The paper asserts the model was trained at a fraction of the cost typically associated with frontier model development. That phrase, a fraction of the cost, is comparative in form. The record does not define the denominator. It does not name the baseline against which the fraction is calculated, which means the efficiency claim is structured as a contrast without a fixed reference point. The abstract says the training was efficient. It does not say efficient compared to what, measured how, and over what period. What the abstract does not say at all is where the training happened, on what hardware, at what scale of compute. A reader who stopped at the summary would have a complete account of the algorithmic method and a partial account of the benchmark results, and no account whatsoever of the physical substrate. The methods section is a different document. The training setup section and the acknowledgments together supply what the abstract withholds. The report states that training was conducted on a cluster of Nvidia H800 graphics processing units. That sentence, stated in a methods section, carries more industrial weight than the abstract's benchmark line. The H800 is not a standard product in the sense that it emerged from ordinary product development. Nvidia designed it specifically for the Chinese market after the United States Bureau of Industry and Security imposed export controls in October 2022 that restricted the sale of the H100, the full specification accelerator of that generation, to Chinese customers. The H800 reduces certain interconnect speeds relative to the H100, but is otherwise built on the same generation of silicon. The chip exists because a restriction existed. That is the context the methods section inherits without naming. The methods section names the chip. It does not say how many units were used in aggregate. A reader of this section knows the hardware family, but not the cluster size, which means the scale of compute remains unstated in the document. The paper does not say whether the cluster was assembled before or after October 2023, when the Bureau of Industry and Security moved to restrict the H800 itself, adding it to the list that had previously contained only the H100. The paper does not say whether the hardware was acquired through direct purchase, through cloud infrastructure, or through any other arrangement. None of these are concealed. The document is a methods paper, not a procurement filing. The omissions are genre conventions. They become significant when the paper is read as evidence about industrial capability rather than about training algorithms. The specific word the report uses for the infrastructure is worth reading closely. The document refers to the hardware as our cluster. That possessive is the only word in the paper that gestures toward infrastructure ownership, and it does not gesture far. It establishes that the authors had access to a cluster they describe as theirs. It does not establish where the cluster sits, who owns the data center, or when the units in it were purchased. The phrase "our cluster" is the record's most informative silence. It confirms access and withholds everything else about the terms of that access. Reading the abstract alone is something like reading a description of a process without being told what the process runs on. The methods section is the substrate. The H800 is what the substrate is made of, and the H800 is a chip whose existence is itself an artifact of the export control environment, designed to be permissible precisely because it was constrained. The paper does not say when the H800 cluster was acquired. A close reading cannot establish whether the training run preceded the October 2023 controls that added the H800 to the restricted list, which means the document cannot be used to determine whether a replication of this exact training run would be permissible today under the same hardware assumptions. The paper does not say whether any portion of the training used other hardware, domestic or foreign, at earlier stages. It does not say what the cluster cost, which is a significant gap given that the abstract's efficiency claim depends on capital expenditure as much as on compute hours. And the document does not say anything about the availability of comparable hardware for a second training run under current export restrictions. The record establishes that a specific method ran on a specific class of silicon and produced results the authors describe as competitive. It does not establish whether those conditions can be reproduced under the present regulatory environment. What the record settles is narrower than the headline implies and broader than the method's footnote suggests. It establishes that a reinforcement learning method run on a specific class of foreign silicon produced benchmark results the authors report as competitive with frontier performance. Everything beyond that, the dependency going forward, the headroom of domestic alternatives, the question of what the abstract's omissions reflect about the author's intent, lies outside what this document can be made to say. An absent clause is not proof of a decision. A methods section that follows genre conventions is not evidence of concealment. The limits of the record are limits, not facts about intent. Read plainly. The DeepSeek-R1 technical report is a methods paper about reinforcement learning. It is a carefully written account of a training pipeline that produced notable benchmark results. Read against its silences. It is a record of where a capability frontier currently sits in relation to hardware that is no longer freely available for the next run. The export control is not mentioned in the paper. It does not need to be. It is present in the chip designation, in the possessive "our cluster," and in the distance between the abstract's efficiency claim and the line in the methods section that names the accelerator those computations ran on. The headline traveled without that line. The line was always there. The document that shapes a capability does not always arrive as a regulation or a trade ruling. Sometimes it arrives as a methods section, and what it records about the hardware is the restriction that the headline was built on. The next document worth reading twice is the one that names what replaces the H800, or confirms that nothing yet does. When a Chinese artificial intelligence lab publishes a technical report that trained on domestic silicon and names it in the methods section without qualification or footnote, that paper will be worth opening carefully. If you want to read it when it arrives, subscribe and turn on notifications. We will be here